One of the examples of a project that Sidewalk Labs has done and is behind is called Link New York City. It is free public Wi-Fi in exchange for, I believe, 30 cameras and 30 sensors and 3 cameras in each of the kiosks that are right beside bus terminals. And things like that make it seem innocuous because you will be told you've already signed away your privacy when you're using an app. But the truth is that doing so individually and being tracked in aggregate are two very different things. The other example to consider in the built environment is they have come back and said you can opt out. There will always be an option to opt out. If you're renting a place, who gets to opt out? The owner of the place or the person who's renting? So there is a complexity to these things that they're oversimplifying at this point because they want to figure out if they can just put in sensors in the built environment and then figure out what to do with it. So our lessons, which I'm hoping would be useful for you here as we go towards more tech-enabled futures, are nested primarily in a power analysis and how unchecked corporate power can have a huge impact on what we task them to do when we don't have regulations and enforceable policy around some of these things. So if you are part of the urban planning community, you can get behind standardization. And the reason why that's important is because when you build a building, somebody like me is not scared to go to the 10th floor or the 15th floor because I'm scared that the floor won't hold or it's not safe for me, because there are standards in place that you have already complied with, so I can trust that what's being put in place is safe for me to use. The same thing applies to where we're heading right now. Oftentimes, and this is so true in Toronto right now, what is coming forward is so overwhelming for people, they don't understand where they're supposed to start to try and fix some of these things. And one of the reasons why that overwhelm exists is because these corporations say all of this is brand new. We've never done this before. So people like myself who are technologically savvy can understand this, but most people who have not worked in the tech sector, who don't know how these things work, are bound to believe that there's way too much work and it's so overwhelming that we should just give in anyway. And standardization is something that we have in place for so many things and is a framework that should be applied to data collection as well. And we've started this work in Toronto, more to share on that soon. If you are part of policy or regulatory bodies, I think you have to remember to design for the edge cases. And what I mean by that is, in any city, the demographics are strewn in various ways. So you have to design for people who are on the margins when it comes to data collection. So if we are monitoring people in this Sidewalk Toronto proposal, what happens to people who are homeless? What happens to people who are perhaps undocumented? And it's really tempting to focus on the majority of people, but the thing is, if you design for the majority of people who happen to be middle class, upper middle class in big cities like Toronto or Sydney, you will never reach where the people on the margins are. And that's where I think a lot of the most provocative and interesting questions lie in terms of where we're going forward with this stuff. So I would implore that if you're part of policy folks and regulatory bodies, that you take the leap to design for the edge cases. If, like myself, you've worked in technology in your career, I think it's really, really important that we start interrogating what we are building as solutions for potential harm. Because a lot of the things that we hear about are the benefits, and they're true for the most part, But if it's not also accompanied by an analysis for what potential harm can be, it's a very lopsided equation. And we have to do better in terms of watching out for who gets left behind when that benefit is delivered, because it's certainly not for everybody. So I would suggest that we go fast with data in the environmental side. So if you want to figure out precipitation, related things, if you want to see sunlight and how you can design things that are related to heat or cool differently, all those things, that technology is amazing. And we can go fast and we can build it now. But when it comes to human and behavioral data, I would ask that we slow down, because we don't understand a lot of things about those. And it's okay to actually slow down and figure out, rather than hurdle into this by saying yes first and then try and figure out a no afterwards when we know better. I was watching the Jetsons again a few weeks ago, and I didn't remember it the way that I saw it this time. I thought it was a really funny show, and it was like futuristic in a really kitschy way. And I watched it this time, and people are so lonely in Jetsons. It's so isolated. Like, none of the social hierarchies changed. In this future, in this magical future, there was a maid. It was just a robot, but it's still a maid, and the women were still in charge of the same things. And it made me think of how, even when we imagine futures, it's hard to break away from what we know as normal. And a lot of what Sidewalk Labs has proposed to Toronto is, frankly, very boring. If we're going to build a city of the future, I hope that we can break some of the things that we know don't work. And the things that they're proposing right now, although packaged really beautifully, are not necessarily, quantum leaps. And I think we have the potential with the technology that we have to do better. Because we have to remember, I was in a conversation yesterday, and someone said, to these companies that are so focused on predictive analysis, the present has lost its meaning, because the present only exists as a validator for whether their predictions about from the past were true or not. And I don't know if we want that. I don't want that in the cities where I live, because I want the gritty human stuff to stay in there. I don't want it so cleaned up and so automated that people are feeling isolated, which is a thing that has actually happened in what is deemed as the smartest city in the world. It is in Korea at this moment, and people there are reporting high degrees of depression, even though most of the work that we think is grunt work is being done automatically for them. So we know enough. I think smart cities, even though it's become trendy to talk about them, and we have some technology that scales better now, they're not new. They've been around a few decades. We have some lessons that we can draw. And I hope that we can do better than where Toronto's proposal seems to be headed. And that's what the residents are proposing. So for everyone, no has to be an option. And that is a thing that is missing from the table entirely in so many of the proposals being put forward. It's more about mitigating than saying we don't want that at all. And that has to be an option. You might have heard that San Francisco banned facial recognition, I believe a week ago that was shared. They've banned it from private corporations, public, and that is so important, because some of these things we know enough that there is no better version at this point, or perhaps ever. So at the way things stand right now, I hope that no gets to be an option. One of my colleagues shared this with me, and it stayed with me. Clicking I agree with that reading privacy policies is an act of surrender and not of consent. And we have to remember that. Just because you're saying yes does not mean that you wanted to, or you understood, or you agreed. It's because you are blocked from using something unless you say yes. So that's why you don't read it, because it doesn't matter whether you read it or not, right? I hope that, like me, you are also thinking about our collective legacy. I've been thinking a lot about that. What are we leaving behind? And what are we working towards? And I hope that we can work to do more than quantify and commodify our lives. I hope that we will be remembered for more than just enclosing and appropriating new spaces, because I think that it's 2019 and we can dream bigger than that. This is a quote from one of my dear friends who's a city builder and placemaker in Toronto. And she said that there would be less personal sacrifice if there was more collective courage. And what that means is, if all of us wanted to head in a different direction than what seems to be the easiest path right now, there would be less friction. And I know it seems hard, and I know all of you are probably responsible for a P&L line on your budget, and you have a quarterly report, and you have full-time staff, and maybe making a different choice today would mean that short-term you make less money. I hope that we can look at it as part of our legacy and not our quarter, because that's what's at stake. So thank you so much for having me, and I hope that you can learn some stuff from us, and I hope to learn more from you.